Hello, hello, and welcome back to a live stream. Oh, wait, yeah, let's go to just chatting. Interesting. Uh, yeah, well, give me a second. It will start working in a second. That's for sure. Yep. Um, yep. Uh, yeah, that is good. Yeah. Hello, hello. Welcome back to yet another live stream. This time around, we will be watching videos, uh, especially no, not racing videos. Fuck. Uh, 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 yeah, not racing videos. We'll be watching. For fuck's sake, man. I can't say it only.
The world?
Um. Um. Yeah, we'll be watching this thing. How the history of cars or something like that. Something about cars. Okay, that's all. Yeah, let's go here. Wow, what happened? Oh, yeah, wait, I went to the wrong fucking screen. Okay, yeah, we'll be watching this channel because I did watch few of them and they were really good. So, oh fuck, he started only 9 months ago, or maybe he has done something before that. No, okay. Which one is Porsche? I saw GTR. I saw Honda. I saw Mitsubishi. I saw McLaren also. Okay, I haven't seen this, I think. What is this? This is. I don't know which one is that though. I think I have seen that also. Let's watch this first while I eat my food.
Widowmaker. It means something that kills. Dangerous, reckless, and wicked devices that only the brave go near. Machines that have taken the lives of legends.
John Wolfe didn't survive.
That are so downright difficult to wield. They terrify even the most brave among us. And yet, we keep making them. As if our brains are wired this way. The allure of commanding something capable of destroying us drives us on. An animal instinct within some of us to push the envelope until it tears.
I mean, that's
To
what makes us
dance
humans,
with the
right?
shadowy figure of our own
I guess.
demise. A dark voice in the back of our head. That when we ride that bleeding edge, it tells us, go further. From the first brave souls that took to the skies in hastily assembled aircraft, explorers that braved the open seas in search of new horizons, to the dreamers that first left the atmosphere of our own Earth, we push on. Today, computers and sensors help us go faster, go further, without fear, in control. But in 1975, we had only our hands and feet to guide us. And Porsche decided to give us a tool of our own annihilation. A double-edged sword. A machine that required your utmost attention.
Okay.
To tame its raw power, you needed grit, technique, and bravery. And it was worth it. This was the Widowmaker, the 930 Turbo. Chuck Yeager was the first human being to hurtle across the sound barrier. He did it piloting the Bell X-1. Piloting is a word I'm using generously here. The X-1 was nothing more than a rocket modeled after a .50 caliber bullet. His odds of success were, well, let's just say there were a lot of death pools for early test pilots. Yet, it was Yeager's respect for his own mortality that kept him above ground. No one else was as aware of the danger posed by flight, and that knowledge made him study and adapt constantly in order to gingerly step forward, over the understood limits of humanity. Scientists at the time didn't know what would happen at supersonic speeds. They thought the air pressure might just rip the plane apart, or that the pressure wave created would obliterate nearby homes. But the call of the void was too great. They had to know. And above the California desert in 1947, that sound barrier was broken.
Sound barrier.
Brave, or stupid, or both, Chuck Yeager became the first person to travel over Mach 1. A mere 7 years later, the US was already trying for Mach 2. And yet again, it was Chuck Yeager that climbed into the flying coffin known as the XF-104 Starfighter. To underline how courageous this was, he was piloting the third Starfighter. The first two had already crashed. And the third fared no better. Chuck survived the incident and went on to do something safer like fly for NASA. The US, on the other hand, had wars to win. And a new high-altitude interceptor could help turn the tides of battle. They wanted their new jet now. So they put it into production without a second thought.
Premiere of a new star blazing in the sky.
In 1958, the
Knowing
F-104
that it was
Starfighter entered
crashing?
service. A jet meant only to do two things: get very high and go very fast. A rapid response jet, capable of getting to the fight and leaving it before its rivals. It broke records for altitude, climb rate, and speed, and was adopted by almost every major military air force in its short lifespan. But most importantly, it instilled a healthy fear into every one of its pilots. In the German Luftwaffe, its reputation was notorious. To fly one was akin to playing Russian roulette. You see, it was designed only with speed in mind, not safety. It had dangerously thin wings that were pushed far to the back of its frame. It didn't carry a lot of fuel, and it couldn't turn very hard. And it was terrifying to land because if you got too slow, it would simply fall out of the damn sky. It was such a dangerous and difficult beast to tame, the Germans lost over 200 of them to accidents, taking the lives of over 100 pilots, earning it the now infamous title of Widowmaker, a tool as deadly to its operator as it is to its enemies. Although the stakes are never as high as in war, the racetrack is a very real battlefield, where competitors have to fight for every inch, and in many cases, failure carries the same consequence.
We all have a desire to create something that will show we were here and did something of value. To create something timeless.
Enter Porsche, who was no stranger to war. They are, after all, a company founded in Germany prior to 1935. And like nearly all companies who forged weapons for combat, after the war they found a home in automobiles and racing. In the 60s, they found themselves standing toe-to-toe with Ferrari and Ford, even stealing a win from the Blue Oval in Le Mans with the legendary 917. By 1972, Porsche was well on its way to becoming the king of motorsports. They were a household name in Le Mans, Rally, GTP, and had entered the infamous Canadian-American Challenge Series. At the helm of their Can-Am car was a driver named George Follmer, who legend has it was incapable of ever being serious. What was serious, though, was the car he was tasked with piloting. It was dubbed Turbo Panzer, or 917/10. It was an 1,100 horsepower demon based on the Le Mans winning 917. The 917-10 had a bigger engine and an even bigger turbo. For his first race, Follmer was handed the keys to the 917-10 at a Can-Am race at Road Atlanta. Follmer had never driven the 917-10. He'd also never driven at Road Atlanta. Oh shit was about all he could muster to say before he took the challenge. Despite his misgivings, he and the 917-10 would bring home the gold, and essentially ruin Can-Am forever. Seriously, the Can-Am Association effectively banned the 917-10 specifically, then stopped running the race entirely. The end of Can-Am racing left a turbo-shaped hole in Porsche's heart though, so they set their sights on the Grand Touring Championship in Group 4. And Group 4 meant homologation, meaning if a car was going to be raced, hundreds needed to be sold to the public, an unsuspecting public that was about to witness a beast that refused to be tamed.
Performance, practicality, and value.
The choice was clear. The 911 was already the perfect sports car, the chassis already tuned to perfection. It just wasn't fast enough. Porsche's solution was to pull the 3.0-liter engine from the Carrera RS, their most powerful engine of the time.
Okay.
And a wise man, Dr. Ernst Fuhrmann, decided, F it, let's turbocharge it. Give it massive power. Consequences be damned. It was one of the least Porsche things Porsche has ever done, and it was excellent. The new power proved too much for the 911's chassis at the time, so Porsche widened the rear axles to try to keep it in check. It wasn't enough. So they fashioned a new engine cover with a massive wing providing more downforce. It wasn't enough. They stiffened the suspension, added bigger brakes. It wasn't enough. They employed a more durable 4-speed transmission rather than using a more fragile 5-speed of the time. They did everything they could to tame this new wild monster, and it wasn't enough. In
Okay.
1975, they gave the green light to release their new child to the ill-prepared masses. They called it the 911 Turbo, and it was fast. Much like the Starfighter screaming overhead, the 930T was little more than a monster of an engine with just enough control to give you the illusion of being in charge, and it was like nothing else at the time. The muscle car was dead.
1970 442.
Even the Corvette had around 200 horsepower. Japan was still a sleeping giant. There alone was this turbocharged monstrosity, poised to blow the competition away. It was immediately adopted by driving enthusiasts, who were tenderly stepping out and acquiring 930s of their own. Mario Andretti, Walter Röhrl, Jackie Eakes, all 930 turbo owners, and all Chuck Yeagers in their own right.
And this is it, the very latest 911 Turbo. Not my choice of colour, perhaps, but that doesn't detract from these classic 911 lines.
Fear is an emotion that comes from understanding, an understanding of the danger you're in, because that respect, that fear keeps you alive. Walter Röhrl, a World Rally Championship driver, the tertiary equivalent of an Air Force veteran, still considered the 930 a challenge to drive. His day job had him piloting Group B cars, but the early turbo Porsche proved to be a handful, even in the hands of an expert. The 930 Turbo was the fastest German car in production in 1975. It was a rocket bred for racing, sold to regular consumers out of necessity. It became just as much of a status symbol off the track as it was on. Everyone from dentists to business tycoons to hockey stars wanted one. What they didn't know was that many of them would come to regret it, or worse.
Oh.
Creating machines that propel us to new limits while staying in control and keeping us alive is a monumental task. Now, a lesson in physics. The Porsche 911's engine is in the back, not the middle, the full rear. Anyone remember the Corvair? It was deemed unsafe at any speed. Here's a little known secret. Porsches had the same problem. Rear engine, lightweight, and too much power. That means if you don't know what you're doing, you go for a ride. Feel a little oversteer mid-corner and decide to lift off that throttle out of panic? You just fuck up. The weight transfers forward off the drive wheels and you spin. Hopefully not near a cliff or into oncoming traffic. And that's without the turbo. When you add a turbo to this recipe, a big, slow-to-spool turbo, that is nothing like the smooth twin-turbo systems that we're used to nowadays. You get fooled by a lack of power as you sit in the low revs. And then it hits you. The turbo spools up around 3,000 or 4,000 RPMs, and you end up getting pulled into the back of your seat. A surprise burst of power from an engine moments before that was putting you to sleep. And all of this while you're trying to keep a notoriously hard to control car pointed straight. The danger of that big turbo cannot be overstated. Before the boost builds, the 930 is a tame old sports car that doesn't like you. It doesn't want to do what it's told, and it can barely get out of its own way. Then, after what feels like an eternity, the boost comes on, and your sluggish coupe becomes a starfighter hurtling towards the sound barrier. If that power spike hits mid-turn, you can't lift or you'll spin out. Do you have the moxie to ride it out? To keep that foot planted? Countersteering the massive unbalanced weight of the rear swinging around on you? That kind of driving takes racing drivers years to master, but this wasn't a race car. This was a normal sports car sold to any idiot with enough money. It was akin to selling a tank to a casual hunter, or an F-14 Tomcat to a drone pilot. Like anything else so close to the edge, it only takes a minor mistake to send you over. Now, does that stop anyone?
Nope.
Of course not. It didn't stop the husband of Cynthia Files. He bought his 930 Turbo and loaned it to his wife one day for work. After a few drinks, she gunned the 930 off of a stoplight, trying to impress her boss in the passenger seat. The turbo spooled up and pulled her to the back of her seat. Terrifying Cynthia, she hit the brakes before a slight turn. The rear end rotated and her boss was killed in the ensuing accident with oncoming traffic. The following legal case was record-breaking. Porsche was made to pay out $2.5 million in damages, setting a precedent for drivers suing car makers for irresponsibly made cars. The body count for Porsche kept piling up. Another driver hit a telephone pole, hockey star Pelle Lindbergh ended up in the kinetic barrier.
On a respirator when his Porsche crashed.
Porsche was forced to finally acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, handing an ill-tempered race car to the idiot masses was a bad idea. As a result, Porsche has offered performance driving classes to anyone who buys their most dangerous cars. And while the media blamed Porsche, just like they blamed the Corvair, or the MR2 later, the truth is always the same. We still want them, these fatal machines. We humans want to try our hands at harnessing the uncontrollable. How many times have we witnessed the same story? The Carrera GT picked up the same Widowmaker moniker 30 years later, after throwing more than a few experienced drivers for a ride. And while Porsche may seem to have a knack for killing its customers, they certainly aren't alone. The Dodge Viper, the Shelby Cobra, anything that was ever made by TVR. The truth is, every car manufacturer wants to be like
what is
Porsche, pushing the
TVR?
boundaries of what's possible, redefine.
What the fuck? What is DVR? Oh, British manufacturing company. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Defining the limits of performance, and subsequently, what is safe. Rarely, though, are they brave enough to do it. Time and time again, Porsche has shown us they're willing to create a hammer too heavy to wield, a blade so sharp it cuts both ways, weapons so powerful they should never be employed. We can argue about whether or not it was smart for the 930 to be trusted in human hands, but we cannot argue with its raw power. A once-in-a-lifetime machine that bent the rules, pushed past what was capable, and gave us something unforgettable. It's human nature that when we see the very limits of what we're capable of, when rules are laid out in front of us, be they laws of physics or assertions of men, it is human will to break those rules. It is in our nature to be limitless.
Yeah, that's what I said. At the start only. Nice video though. Um,
Why are we as Americans so damn American?
You have won with Johnny 7, the one-man army gun.
We're loud, arrogant, clumsy, difficult, dangerous, backwards in so many ways. Yet arguably,
I like it how difficult was just a Karen standing there. Okay, it's very rude for me to assume she was a Karen, but yeah.
the United States has
You know
risen
what
to
I
become
mean,
the leaders
right?
of the free world. That might just be because our nation was built upon rebellion. In 1775, we rebelled against the British Empire, a ragtag group of criminals standing up to colonizers, securing our right to be free. In 1920, we rebelled against Prohibition, an entire nation made into outlaws, a spirit of ingenuity instilled amongst our people, all in the name of getting shit-faced. In 1969, we even rebelled against gravity, breaking the shackles of our planet, erecting our flag upon alien soil, just to be the first, carving in stones our names for all time. And in 1991, it all culminated in one very American act. Almost as a caricature of America itself, a car was unleashed upon the world that didn't care. With smoke, sound, power, and a death wish, the Dodge Viper rebelled against the very concept of boredom.
Boredom?
Viper rebelled against the very concept of boredom.
Oh.
Brash, loud, and wildly unsafe. The Viper was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was Kentucky bourbon poured into a gasoline engine, an angst-ridden teenager with a gas pedal and a death wish, a guitar plugged into an amp and cranked to 11, piercing ears and shattering windows.
1 second. It was nothing apparently.
A guitar plugged into an amp and
I mean, I heard a door knock, so that's why.
cranked to 11, piercing ears and shattering windows. Death wish. A guitar plugged into an amp and cranked to 11, piercing ears and shattering
For fuck's sake, it was in the video, man. Wow.
windows. It was America, and it was brilliant.
This car kicks ass.
No safety, no rules, no limits. It was yours to control if you dared.
Why is this guy so obsessed with no safety, no rules, and revolution? Like, in every video of his thing, he has those things. Like, he has those words said at least minimum 50 times.
It was freedom. Freedom to be irresponsible, to grip the wheel of something untamed, and risk life and limb just for the experience.
You don't drive this car, you just hang on.
A car built by a team of dedicated madmen, whose blood pumped with gasoline, hillbillies and bush mechanics, moonshiners working without oversight on a singular goal: revive the spirit of America. Legends who would go on to become redneck rock stars. This is the story of rebels, of criminals in corporate suits who came together to save America and build the Dodge Viper.
It's so interesting, right? The way he's saying that they saved America. But did they really, though?
Picture an expensive car, like the Bugatti Veyron, a $2 million masterpiece, or its predecessor, the McLaren F1, valued at over $20 million today. Neither, though, is worth as much as a stunning depiction of an automobile. In 2013, Andy Warhol's silver car crash was sold for a whopping $105 million. Crazy. Or is it? You see, art, fine art like Warhol's, in certain cases can increase in value by incredible amounts. even more than some stocks. And as anyone that invests will tell you, a diverse portfolio is important. And with today's volatile markets, contemporary art's low correlation to stocks and bonds means your money is wisely invested. But you can't afford to buy a 9-figure painting, and you probably can't afford to store it and keep it safe. Without needing to own far in 2020 percent paintings with the skip the list and join the. Look, you know the drill.
Yeah.
Before I tell you about what you came to see, we gotta go back in time a little bit. It's 1962, and a man from Texas has just created a machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. Light as a feather, with no roof, 2 seats, 2 doors, and unheard of power. It was his first and arguably most important creation. He called it the CSX 2000. You or I might call it a Cobra. That cowboy, of course, was Carroll Shelby.
My name's Carroll Shelby, and performance is my business.
Now, Shelby probably needs his own video. There's zero chance I'm gonna do him justice here, but I'll do my best. Long story very short, Shelby flew warplanes, owned a dump truck, worked on an oil derrick, started a chicken farm, and began racing in the big leagues starting in the 1950s. Carroll Shelby was the quintessential post-war American man, and that man had a singular dream: to build some really goddamn fast racing cars. To hear him tell it, he only became a race car driver just to learn about how they worked. And from his experience driving those race cars around the world, he saw one massive problem. America in the late 50s and early 60s had no proper sports cars. Sure, we had the Corvette, but this was back before the Corvette was good. No, in Shelby's eyes, America was missing an all-purpose, all-American sports car that you could race on the weekend. A car to take on Ferrari and Aston Martin, to put an American on the podium. So he said, F it, he'd build one himself. Now, he wasn't much of a mechanic, but due to his personality and racing history, he knew how to assemble and lead a team. People who knew how to build a car, all following the winning formula: less weight and more power. The featherweight came from the AC Ace, a fiberglass and aluminum sports car from England that was going out of production. Its engine, though, was a total disappointment. So power would come from Ford, who were on the cusp of releasing a new lightweight small block V8. Thankfully, Shelby had an in at Ford, Lee Iacocca, the son of an immigrant who worked his way from hot dog chef to vice president of Ford, where he was responsible for the Mustang. You know, the most important car Ford produced since the Model T. He'd also saved Dodge from going belly up, but we'll get to that later. Shelby approached Iacocca with a simple request: give me 25 grand and a boatload of engines. To sell it, Shelby planted an idea in Iacocca's head. This would be a Ford-powered car that would crush Chevy's new darling Corvette. I don't think anyone actually believed Shelby could do it, but Iacocca is a man that loves a good underdog story, and loves a good sports car, so Shelby got his seed money and some brand spanking new Ford V8s to play with. What they built was the Carroll Shelby Experimental, but thanks to a name that came to him in a dream, it was released as the AC Cobra in 1962. It was wildly unsafe, incredibly fast, had no roof, and stop me if this sounds kind of familiar, it would absolutely kill an inexperienced driver. That might sound terrible to you, but you see, this was an American car for American people. And when we hear that something's a bad idea, or it's dangerous, well, we just gotta give it a go. So the Cobra ignited a fire in the heart of every speed junkie in the 1960s. Its raw power and unhinged behavior was the perfect blend, a sort of freedom personified and placed upon 4 wheels. Shelby's Cobra is simply one of the greatest cars ever created. You only need to look at how often it's replicated to know this to be true. It's one of the most sought after, drooled over, and romanticized cars ever made. And it was the spark that set off the burning flames of American cars in the early 60s. That is, right before the 70s came along and they all turned to shit.
Clever boy. I'll book you as special officer.
If you can handle the way people react to your 1970 Dodge Challenger, you could be Dodge material.
Now look, boy, I know a race car when I see one.
What do you do if your biggest gift to the world is giant, gas-guzzling V8s, and suddenly gas becomes basically unobtainable? Panic. You panic. And that's what happened to the US during the oil crisis. We entered the malaise era, a period of American awfulness. Cars so ugly, so bland and revolting that it nearly killed the industry as a whole. Japan and Europe had been prepared for this disaster, with their small, fuel-efficient cars flying out of dealerships. But America got left in the dust, and none of the big three could figure out how to cope. Ford built, well, the Pinto. Chevy just flat out forgot how to build cars, and Chrysler was on the verge of bankruptcy. Enter Lee Iacocca, who due to some political shenanigans was now in charge of Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth. At the time, Chrysler wanted the government to save them from bankruptcy. Yeah, 2008 wasn't the first time that we the people paid our hard-earned money to save poorly managed car companies. So in the late 70s, when Chrysler asked for a handout, the nation had one condition. They had to have a plan. Chrysler needed to be able to prove that they weren't jumping out of the pot and into the fire. Lee Iacocca had a few ideas. First, he would expand Chrysler's influence by snatching up other companies like AMC and Lamborghini, and share resources between the companies to lower development costs. Then, he would cut spending relentlessly, and kill any department that wasn't making money. Neither of these things would be enough, though, so Iacocca unveiled the final piece of his plan. Simply change the way the cars are made forever.
For too long now, America's been taking a beating at the gas pump. K-Cars, the American way to beat the pump.
Sometimes, even a bad idea can have a positive effect. Or to put it more bluntly, some truly terrible cars can lead to an automotive revolution. Look, I simply can't overstate how important Iacocca is in car history. Not just to enthusiasts like you and I, but as a direct effect on John Q. Public. Revolutionary is almost an understatement. Iacocca's vision was that Chrysler would build a line of cars all on the same platform. This revolutionary idea was known as the K-Car, a simple front-wheel drive box that could be reworked to fill any role. You slap panels on it, and it's a family hauling station wagon called the Reliant. Drop the top and trim it in wood, and you have the executive LeBaron. Turbocharge it, and you have something that kind of looks like a sports car from a distance. You may notice that this is how pretty much every car is done now. Companies develop one platform, and that platform gets shared by a ton of makes and models. But in 1979, it was a completely novel concept. Chevy basically only made 2 cars after being inspired by the K-Car, the Corvette, and everything else. Nissan made 1 car in 2003, and, well, it's still making that car. Love it or hate it, this essentially saved American cars as a whole. To compete with the Japanese, American car companies could now sell an affordable car to everyone who needed one, and take home a giant stack of cash to boot. And it was just in time for the 80s, a time when nearly everyone was struggling to afford a car. Now, look, the K-Cars were not amazing vehicles. They were slow, front-wheel drive turds that fell apart if you left them in the sun too long, but they were exactly what America needed at the time. Dodge had gone from the hero of the people in the 60s to self-immolating in the 70s. But powered by whiny, buzzy four-bangers in pot metal boxes, they clawed their way out of the red and set the standard for American automobile manufacturing. And thanks to that idea, and the help of another iconic automotive dreamer, America started to put up a fight.
Something stirring. And there's no denying its energy. Its force. Its arrival. Dodge, setting new standards of performance.
As American cars went through a roller coaster of failures and successes, a Marine pilot named Bob Lutz had gotten out of the service and stepped into the role of VP of Sales for BMW, a German company with questionable ownership that made slow luxury cars for slow luxury people. Lutz hated slow cars, though. In fact, the parallels between Shelby and Lutz are hard to ignore. Both started as pilots, loved the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber, and dreamed of
Pilots getting into cars. Interesting. Maybe it's the thrill?
creating the ultimate driver's cars. So Lutz's vision for the German company was simple: create the ultimate driving machine. No, really, that was his idea. Before Lutz, BMW had the 2002, a great car, but not exactly a hot ticket item. When it came time to replace the 2002, BMW intended on ditching their iconic kidney bean grills and making a knockoff Mercedes-Benz. Lutz had a better idea: keep the grills, continue to use numbers instead of names, and oh yeah, make the cars fun to drive. During his tenure, he would drive the development of the 3 Series and lay the groundwork for one of the most famous letters in all of automotive history: M. After successfully rewriting BMW's future, Lutz returned to the States to punish Ford for going all in on the Pinto, and helped create the Mark III Escort, aka Ford's Group B icon. By the time he left Ford to join his friend Iacocca as an executive at Chrysler, Lutz had learned a few things about making fast cars. The problem, of course, is that Chrysler just didn't make fast cars. They made K-cars. Lutz was not about to let that continue, though. Being a gearhead through and through, Lutz's personal car was a replica of the iconic Shelby Cobra 427. He peeled the Ford badges off it and drove it to work to show it off to one of Chrysler's lead designers, a guy named Tom Gale, a third-generation engineer with a need for speed who was itching to work on something exciting. Lutz shows Gale one of America's last great heroes, a shining example of when American men split and fought and drank too much, of when America still dreamed of conquering the world. And in the parking lot of a company that produced automotive boredom, Lutz turns to Gale and says, "I'm sick of uninspiring bullshit. We need to build one of these."
If Chrysler isn't the performance company, then I'm Joe Isuzu.
The Cobra certainly made an impression. In the weeks following their meeting, Gale spent his evenings carving a design from clay. Smooth, muscled lines began to take shape. A long, protruding nose to hold a massive power plant. A sleek, low profile, akin to the Jaguar E-Type. Designed from the beginning to be ruthless. A true, spiritual successor to the Shelby Cobra. Gale was inspired. He knew they were onto something. This clay model simply had to come to life. All he needed was to convince the man who could make it happen. Gale showed the model to Lutz, whose heart began to race. Perhaps, like at BMW, this was the moment to revive a dying brand, with something as profound and intoxicating as the Shelby 427 Cobra, a car that America had fallen in love with decades past. That simple meeting of the minds was enough. Lutz got to work assembling Team Viper in secret. From Dodge's truck department, he brought on Francois Castaing, a Parisian man with a penchant for bending the rules, who cut his teeth building engines for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. He stole Dick Winkles from the performance division, who'd been working on Lamborghini engines at the time, and of course, had the best name. And he recruited an engineer named Roy Schoberg. Schoberg was new to Dodge, but his last boss was a guy named Zora Arkus Dumpov, the brain behind the Corvette. Schoberg sent out word that he would need his own team of engineers and mechanics, and he had his pick of more than 140 volunteers. From the herd, he culled out 21 of the bravest, stupidest, and most secretive among them. The #1 qualification to be on Team Viper? Racing experience. Because who better to build a fast car than people who actually like to go fast? This ragtag skunkworks team would become the backbone of one of the most important projects in automotive history. But if anyone knew what they were doing, it might just come crumbling down. Lutz stood before his team and gave them 3 rules. Number 1, the budget can't exceed $50 million. Chrysler was broke. Number 2, it had to be ready for production by the 1992 Detroit Auto Show in 3 years. And number 3, be ethical, be moral, and most importantly, don't get Lutz in trouble. Other than that, they had free reign. This was, and still is, unheard of in a massive automobile conglomerate. They didn't have bureaucrats hovering over them. They had no rules. They didn't need to appeal to a board of directors every step of the way, and every man and woman wanted to be there, each of them doing their part to cure the cancer of boring American cars. Now, being free from bureaucracy came at a cost, though. The Dodge bigwigs didn't believe that America wanted a fast car. They were simply interested in profits and volume sales. So if the word got out of an expensive undertaking to make a limited run sports car, well, let's just say loose lips would have sunk that ship. To keep the vultures away, Lutz had to keep the budget for the Viper microscopic. Normally, it's not uncommon to see new car development costs stretched into the billions with a B. The Viper team only had 5% of that. They had to be incredibly resourceful. To do so, the Viper prototype became a parts bin special. Nicknamed Felicity, the first mule was actually a Corvette that had to be widened to match the Viper's dimensions. It was quickly scrapped as it still wasn't wide enough. Castang snuck parts from the truck division to save on costs, including wheel hubs and suspension components from the upcoming Dodge Dakota. Winkles dusted off a performance Hemi V8 from the 1960s just so the new prototype could move under its own power. There was just one final obstacle, the big boss, Lee Iacocca, now chief executive of Chrysler.
What did you expect?
A man who'd become the champion of cheap, boring, and responsible car design. But Lee was the man who brought the Mustang into the world. Was that person still in there, buried underneath the years of caked-on bureaucratic bullshit? Lutz aimed to find out. He went to Iacocca's office to pitch the idea of producing the Viper for real. In order to seal the deal, Lutz took with him a secret weapon. In the back rooms of Dodge's headquarters sat the man that Iacocca had not been able to say no to all of those years ago. Someone he'd listened to, someone who had defined what it meant to make American cars. Carroll Shelby himself. Of course, any real car enthusiast never actually slows down, and at 66 years old, Shelby still had more than enough fire and passion to show Iacocca that Chrysler had lost its way, that America had lost its way, and that Lutz's team had just the right way to fix it. Lutz was of course initially against the car being put into production, but his doubts faded with time, and thanks to the inspiring words of Shelby and a glimpse of the prototype, Lutz agreed to show the world what they'd been working on, and let the masses decide the future of American cars.
Who knows what lurks in the heart of Dodge? The shadow knows.
In 1989 at the International Auto Show, Lutz personally revealed the prototype to a stunned audience. It shocked the press and public immediately, and for good reason. First, it had a badass name. The origins of that come from Italy. Tom Gale was having dinner with the head of Italdesign, who at the time was helping design the Eagle Premier for Chrysler. Talk of the project came up along with the origins of the Shelby Cobra. Gale asks Giorgetto what an Italian word for snake is. Vipera, he replies. Viper. Back home, Gale tells Lutz and the team about the chat, and Viper becomes the fitting name for this deadly, curvy car that will kill you with its bite. And while its name was fantastic, the Viper of 1989 was nothing but a sheet metal mock-up with truck parts and an old V8. Its questionable underpinnings mattered not though, it was an immediate smash hit. The audience of the auto show was used to America as it existed in the 80s, boring boxes on wheels that could barely move. Yet here sat this thing that looked better than a Corvette, had a way cooler name, and was touted as the fastest car America had ever made. The press were snapped out of the malaise trance, shocked into remembering the heritage of American speed. The excitement was undeniable. Enthusiasts sent blank checks to Dodge begging to be put first in line for one. The checks were returned, but Iacocca could no longer deny what Lutz had presented them. They had bottled lightning. And now, with the world eagerly waiting for what was to come, with Chrysler's full complement of resources at their disposal, the team was increased to 85 heads, who got to work on creating the actual car. The first step, though, was getting rid of that god-awful V8. Among the press and slack-jawed public at the Viper reveal stood Herb Helbig, an engineer for Chrysler's big horsepower division. Herb had signed up to work in the trenches on Team Viper, and Herb's first action was to help ditch the aging V8. Today, tales of why the Viper got a V10 range from laziness, tax loopholes, and endless batch conspiracy theories. The most common one being that the engine is from a Lamborghini. It's not. There's no shared design or parts from a Viper to a Lamborghini. The truth is, the Viper got 10 cylinders because Americans are cheap. That makes it no less absurd, though. While Italians were parading around in monstrous V12s and Japan was perfecting the small displacement turbo engine, Dodge decided to go their own way and power their supercar with a truck motor. Call it lazy or resourceful, one thing that made it special was that it was different. No one else was putting a 10-cylinder engine in a production car. Yeah, you could find them in some racing applications, but overall a V10 is unbalanced, heavy, and gigantic. Pretty terrible basis for a road car. So why do it? If you recall, Team Viper had no budget. Hell, half the parts in the car were already from a truck. They figured, what the hell, let's plop the engine in there too. At the time, Dodge's truck division was already prepping a V10 for the new Ram, a big, modern engine with tons of displacement and lots of torque. Most importantly, it was convenient, something they could essentially just drop in the Viper's massive engine bay and not have to develop too much. I believe they call this American ingenuity or laziness. You decide. Early on, Roush Performance had helped mock up the first V10 prototype engines. But for production, the Viper team turned to Lamborghini, who at the time was a subsidiary of Chrysler. They took the massive chunk of iron and corn dogs, recast it in aluminum, and refined its parts, and sent it back stateside. There, then, was the heart of the beast. A somewhat lightweight, relatively simple, truck-derived push-rod behemoth. Nearly 8 liters of democratic power. 400 proud horses to send this beast galloping. More Clydesdale than Mustang. It revved low and grunted loud. 10 cylinders flopping about unbalanced beneath a long hood. Early Vipers are described as sounding more like a UPS delivery truck than a finely tuned Italian supercar. They're also described as being really goddamn fast. Sure, it was unbalanced, unsightly, unrefined, and unconventional, but the Viper was alive. Powered by insane ideas, the heart of a truck, kissed by Lamborghini and crammed into a long, low muscle car. GetRag was approached to develop a transmission to negotiate the power of the rear wheels, but they scoffed at the idea of a ham-fisted American thrashing their gears, so Borg-Warner stepped up to the plate. The combination created a work of art. Not really something Renoir would paint, but akin to a Jackson Pollock, but art nonetheless. A masterpiece that could breathe better and grunt louder than anything else. Built simply, its intent pure, its delivery classic. In short, the very first production aluminum V10 was about as American.
Yeah, let me go wash my hands and come on. I'm back.
American as it could be. Take a little bit of knowledge from everywhere, turn it into something over the top, and then claim it was your idea the entire time. When the first prototype rolled off the line using the new production-ready V10, enthusiasts from Washington to Florida fell to their knees because they knew their savior had come. Together, Lutz and Iacocca went for a drive, and somewhere over the roar of that angry V10, Iacocca gave Lutz the green light to make the damn thing. But make it fast.
The countdown is on, and soon the 500 field will race into the record books. But before the green flag falls, Wish TV will take a special look at what it took to get to the big race.
The next year, in 1991, only 2 years after the first clay model, Chrysler was asked to provide a pace car for the Indy 500. Their first choice was the new Dodge Stealth, which was just a rebadged Mitsubishi GTO. That pissed Lutz off. Why show off something we didn't even make? After a few choice words with the PR team, the Stealth was swapped for the now production-ready Dodge Viper. The world got its first glimpse of the new all-American sports car when it opened the famous IndyCar race, driven by none other than Carroll Shelby himself. The Viper team had done it, a production car in 3 years with minimal budget that not only evoked the raw, untamed spirit of the Cobra, but received the blessing of the Cobra's father. That following January, Dodge tipped the basket and let loose the venomous snakes into the onlooking crowd.
Dodge Viper. See your nearest Dodge dealer. They'll be there for you.
True to its inspiration, the first production Vipers were raw. The top was made from a cheap canvas. There were no door handles, and the only safety feature you got was a seatbelt. Options? None. If you wanted to buy a Viper, you were getting an engine with 4 wheels attached. Comfortable was dead. Cheap metal boxes that put you to sleep were the old Dodge. New Dodge was here to eat raw liver, drink Everclear, and kick the Corvette's ass. True to Lutz's vision, the Viper was a Cobra for a new generation, and it broke the mold. It became the hero that America needed. It redefined what the American car could be. People lined up to buy them, probably because it was just so different. Today, we know Dodge as the cowboy hat brand of muscle cars for ex-Marines, but in the early 90s, they were the company that sold you your first minivan. But their new offering burned that minivan to the ground, and it did it for less money than a Corvette ZR1, all while looking better, going faster, and trying to kill you. No one really cared about that last part. Journalists warned people not to buy them after failing to contain the power on a racetrack. This was the car that might just be your very last. There were rumors that 30% of them crashed on the way home from the dealership. Insurance companies cowered in fear. The cost of a Dodge Viper accident was 7 times the national average. To add fuel to the fire, the first Viper had soft motor mounts that would shake your shifter around. Inattentive drivers would shift from 3rd to 2nd instead of 4th. 465 foot-pounds of torque dumped in your lap and you were suddenly getting fitted for a casket. It was even dangerous sitting still. Francois Cassang was out with a journalist for an article. They tear up the testing grounds and come to a stop. Upon stepping out, Francois' pants touch the now fire-hot side exit exhaust, and his pants catch on fire. It was like the car was designed to send you to an early grave. It mattered not. All of these stories and rumors just encouraged the leadership at Dodge. They had absolutely no issue perpetuating the myths. It didn't matter if they were true or not, they worked. The American public heard about this dangerous, untamable wild beast of a car, and it excited that rebellious part of their brain. The part that tells them to measure things in yards and put cheese in a pizza crust. It made them proud again. Sure, financially the K-car saved Chrysler, but spiritually, the Viper helped Chrysler save America.
So, this car has all the sensitivity and social responsibility of a Tomcat. It's no good, I have just got to have one of these cars. It's just got to! I've got to!
Today, the snarling growl of the Viper is in our rear view mirrors. A memory of when the American spirit once again rose to take on the world in its own way. Thanks to the efforts of Lutz and his team, corporate America learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, you gotta hand the keys to the criminals. But sadly, the Viper struggled with its own existence for years. Lee Iacocca retired and handed Chrysler off to some other guy. Lutz left the Chrysler Group rather than watch his creation turn to dust. Gale would go on to design other cars like the Prowler, but would never again build anything as important as the Viper. Winkles left to go racing, Helbig and Sjoberg were relegated to the back room, and even though the Viper continued for a few more generations, it was just never the same. It became safer, more refined, and more expensive. Everything that the original Viper was not. And yet, that's okay, because the original Viper is still ours. It exists in our hearts and minds as something quintessentially us. American through and through. It didn't belong on European cobblestone
So much American shit is happening, dude.
roads or fit in tight Japanese cities. The Viper was meant to be screaming down a straight southwestern blacktop, spitting its vitriol at its sides as it outruns some overweight police person. Sunglasses on, guitars wailing from its radio, and the dream of the lawless American firmly in its head. The rebel of the West, a wild horse that conquered the lands. The Viper was great because it was terrible. Like a tiger or a wolf, it could kill you. And that's why it made the perfect pet. It cast a light on who we are as a people, Americans. As flawed as we are, great. Not truly the best at anything, but full of an unmistakable spirit. That spirit that everyone else in the world lusts after. The reason they listen to our music and watch our movies. The Viper had the soul of a fighter pilot, the drive of a dedicated race car driver, and the spirit of America that created NASCAR and Kentucky whiskey. All distilled into fire, spit, and tire smoke. It was liberty, it was rock and roll, and it was freedom. It was American.
Interesting. Interesting, very interesting. Yep. I think that's good enough for today, right? I mean, yeah, I did watch 2 videos and I'm done with my food. So I'll get back to work, which is what I need to do right now. So that is it. That is it for this video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.